to another episode of the Performance Prescription Lab podcast with Nilhan and Jess. We're here to discuss practical ways to gauge recovery in this episode. Managing your energy is essential for high performance, both in and out of the gym or the field. To grow in all domains of life, mentally, emotionally, and physically, the key is to create stresses that force you to adapt and improve gradually. Recovery status is a function of multiple inputs. It's influenced by both your psychological and your physiological. Your ability to perform in any arena depends on your physical, mental, and emotional state. Most, most athletes can talk about the importance of recovery in the adaptation process. However, very few listen to their coaches or even their own bodies until they've gone too far. Total stress equals training stress plus life stress. And there's no wholly valid metric to measure both. But a fast paced, hyper productive, and digitally distracted world leaves little room for intentional respite and recovery. However, there has been a recent rise in tech, tools, and supplements that claim to enhance recovery. Rather, that my best rather my best tool is the question, how do you feel today? Nilham?
That's a simple yet powerful question, Jess. And I think some of the athletes find this simple question difficult to answer because having ambitious athletic goals may prevent athletes from speaking up for themselves when things are off track. And as athletes, we push our bodies and minds, and sometimes aren't the best as knowing when it is best to take a step back. We talk about recovery foundations of nutrition, sleep, hydration in episode 3. In episode 4, we discuss ways for athletes to get into a state of recovery quicker after training. But today, we are discussing the athletic indicators of recovery. These indicators offer practical ways to measure, assess, and help you reflect if you are pushing the barrier or overtrained or under recovering. We are going to cover several indicators in today's episode, but they are not limited to whatever we cover in this episode. So if you think we have missed any indicator, you can tell us in the polls that is at the end of this episode if you're listening to us from Spotify, or you can contact us from Perform Prescribe Lab in Instagram and DM us. We are going to cover these in our next season. It's also a good time to ask our listeners to follow us and rate our channel so we know how we are doing. And I just wanted to thank our listeners and supporters. So let's get back to our topic, Jess.
Yeah. Thank you, everybody, for listening. We appreciate it, and we hope you find this episode super interesting. I know we found it really interesting putting it together. So, despite the hype around new and innovative recovery tools, we're still flying blind most of the time.
Mm-hmm.
What is the best strategy to enhance your recovery? What tools do you need? How do you know if these techniques are actually working? The issue is that we don't have standard metrics or battery of tests to accurately assess recovery. Most people are not clued into accurately gauging even their own recovery. So let's consider some metrics and even some easy tests that could possibly be an input to a comprehensive recovery assessment and helping you as an athlete better feel recovered or knowing that you're recovered.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to start with the day-to-day objective
Yeah.
metrics. I have few more other groups or categories in terms of indicators, but I'm going to start with a heart rate metric. Monitoring heart rate is a good way to see how recovery progresses because your heart rate is a function of the interplay between your sympathetic fight or flight and parasympathetic rest and digest system of our autonomic nervous system. During exercise, our sympathetic nervous system dominates. Our ability to recover afterwards is a function of our parasympathetic system. You can go back to episode 4 to learn how you can activate your parasympathetic system at will for recovery. And this takes me to the next key heart rate metric, and it's the resting heart rate. It's a measure of your heartbeat during complete rest, ideally monitored while sleeping or first thing in the morning before getting out of the bed. A lower resting heart rate usually indicates improved fitness and recovery. So, the average person's resting heart rate is somewhere between 60 to 90 beats per minute, BPM, but can be low as 40 beats per minute for highly trained athletes. And once you know your average resting heart rate, any increase by 5-7 beats per minute or 10% indicates that your body is not fully recovered. So you can monitor this daily. Resting heart rate is also an important health indicator for general population. A study done in 2013 tracked the cardiovascular health about 3,000 men for 16 years and found that a high resting heart rate was linked with lower physical fitness and higher blood pressure, body weight, and levels of circulating blood fats. Your wearable devices are really good at measuring trends and changes over resting heart rate. For example, since I started exercising more frequently and often, my Apple Watch offers me insights about the change in my resting heart rate, which I also understand that my recovery is improved, but also my training status has increased.
Yeah.
I'm going to continue with the next indicator in terms of heart rate, and it's the heart rate recovery. It's a measure of the rate of decline in heart rate after cessation of exercise. So when you're done with your exercise, essentially you measure your heart rate immediately after a bout of intense exercise, and again each minute afterwards, and subtract one from the other. The faster your heart rate recovers, the higher your level of fitness. So a heart rate recovery of 50 to 20 beats per minute after 1 minute of rest is considered about average for heart health, and anything faster than that reflects good heart health and improved recovery. I'm gonna hand over to you, Jess, for the most trendy indicator among athletes of recent times. I'm gonna do drum rolls. Heart rate variability. That's probably the one that is mostly interesting for many of the athletes.
Yeah. So I think heart rate variability, a lot of people sometimes will shorten it to HRV, is it's a fairly new measurement that many of us are seeing since basically the influx of wearable devices like Whoop, Garmin, Aura rings, Apple watches. Everyone has an HRV measurement, and I feel like a lot of people don't understand what it is or how what it means. So we're going to kind of dive into that. So HRV measures the difference in the amount of time between consecutive heartbeats. HRV gives us a real time measurement of the dynamic interplay between our sympathetic and our parasympathetic drive. So, what I basically am saying is if a person is more in a fight or flight mood, the variation between subsequent beats is going to be low. So, you're going to have a low HRV. If one is in a more relaxed state, the variation between the beats will be high. You will have a high HRV. The faster you can switch between the inputs, between sympathetic and parasympathetic, the healthier your autonomic nervous system is and the more efficient you recover. The real-time feedback of HRV shows more mindfulness, sleep, and physical activity affect your nervous system and recovery. If you're under recovered, you will see a trend towards a lower HRV number. It's a good idea to track trends of HRV and also training and see how this correlates. Many times you'll be able to find leading indicators before you're mentally or physically say you need a rest day. I know I have an Aura ring and I do HRV with mine, and I can tell you towards the end of a training cycle before a competition, I notice it starts getting lower and lower as I'm ending and needing a rest day. So I definitely track and look at my HRV just to see kind of how my body is doing. It's definitely an indicator I use. But over the past few decades, research has shown a relationship between low HRV and worsening of anxiety and depression, even, which I found really interesting. So, a low HRV is even associated with an increased risk of death and cardiovascular disease. In contrast, high HRV may indicate higher cardiovascular fitness and resilience to stress.
In one of the resources I read about HRV, because I've been trying to understand HRV quite a lot from different resources. And to be honest, I think what we explained here is pretty clear and simple. But when I read about HRV, one of the resources was saying it's also indicator of the fatigue state of our central nervous system.
Yeah.
So that's also another way to understand it if we are trying to put it into simple words.
Yeah.
And athletes love tracking their indicators, but it's important to make sense of them. And when I see athletes that are low in HRV, sometimes they get a little bit anxious. So, and they can be asking like, how can I make it higher, or how can I correct this? So how to increase your HRV. We have provided the answers already. So I just again advise our listeners to go back to episode 3 and 4 on recovery. There are lots of practical tips, protocols, as Huberman says, that you can easily apply to increase your HRV status. Of course, it doesn't change from one day to the another day easily. But if you simply apply a good level of sleep, nutrition, hydration, that's already give you an HRV boost, in my opinion. So just go back to these episodes. I'm sure they are going to be really helpful for our listeners.
Yeah, I think most people think that, I think the biggest thing that takeaway for HRV is a lot of people think that like when your heartbeat, it beats at the same rate the whole time. Like there's always the same interval between beats, and that HRV is actually showing you that those, they're not the same. And depending on how sympathetic or parasympathetic, your your heart rates are going to vary very little or a lot. And the more they vary is actually better indicator.
Exactly.
Yeah. So I guess I'll jump into our next one, since we kind of covered HRV, and that one is obviously the one that most of us see on our wearables. But there's also, I know some of the wearables also kind of also track breathing rate. And so that's our next indicator we're going to talk about. A person's depth and rate of breathing, or some people will call ventilation, both undergo significant changes under stress. At rest, the dominance of the parasympathetic nervous system results in slower and relatively deeper breathing, which is preferable, whereas the dominance of sympathetic nervous system results in more rapid and shallow breathing, moving towards hyperventilation. Athletes need to be aware of their breathing patterns as an inexpensive and effective way to assess their recovery. I know I can always tell when I'm in a sympathetic state because I feel like I'm breathing through my shoulders and my chest and not through my belly. And so like I'll get tense in my shoulders because I'm just breathing like really, really shallow. So I resonate with that status that very much. There is a test out there, and I'm probably gonna like completely butcher the name of it. The Butico test. I think that's how you pronounce it.
That's how I would put it.
So this test measures the elapsed time between the end of one normal expiration, so out exhale, and the point at which the person needs to take another breath. The natural delay between the breath is called the autonomic pause. Longer pauses are associated with slower, deeper breaths that oxygenate more effectively because the air gets into your alveoli, which are the little sacs at the end of your lungs, and stabilize blood levels of carbon dioxide, which is important for maintaining blood pH. All of the all of this plays a significant role in exercise and recovery. So, how do you conduct this test? In order to conduct the Butico's
Mhm.
test, so you perform the test in the morning after waking up and while you're sitting upright. At the end of one normal breath, so at the end of your exhale, you start your stopwatch and you sit quietly until you feel the need to take another normal breath. This can't be deeper breaths or gasp, but like if you just want to take a breath, you go ahead and stop your stopwatch. At the point in which another normal breath is needed, it should be approximately about 40 seconds. Though many people tend to overbreathe, resulting in a score of, for most people, between 15 and 25 seconds.
Oh, I just
So,
tested it. I was trying to test it now and didn't take too long for me to be honest. But I
you
just
have been
recovered.
sick, so
I've been sick and I'm not recovered, so I know I got my answer.
yeah, so it's something you can take. You can do this on a day when you're fully recovered and you feel
Yeah,
great. And then you can compare it to some days where you might wake up feeling more fatigued or after multiple heavy training
yeah.
sessions. And as you see that number start to decrease, you know your body is not as recovered as
Mm,
it should be. So it's just a
yeah,
way
good
to kind
sign.
of measure at home.
Good sign. This reminds me of the Wim Hof breathing method as well.
Yeah.
Have a pause in between, and I think, of course, also as more as you do and as you increase your endurance capacity, I think this is going to increase. But I just tested it, and I'm not recovered yet. I know now it's official.
You put it out there in the world. Everyone
Exactly.
knows now.
Uh, because this is going to take me to the next indicator, because I need
Yeah.
more of something to recover, and it's the best indicator of recovery known to science. It's sleep.
Yeah.
So let's continue with the sleep quality and sleep duration metrics. It's the ultimate recovery aid. I have just been sleeping and eating well, to be honest, to feel better. You can spend your whole day in a cryotherapy chamber or use your foam roller, but if you're not getting enough sleep, your recovery will be subpar. Sleep repairs the tissue damage from hard training, boosts your immunity, reduces inflammation. We talk about this many times, which contributes to proper recovery. It's not only a function of how much time you spend in bed each night, but more importantly, the depth and quality of your sleep. We have sleep stages, and there has to be a good balance between these sleep stages. And of course, you need sufficient time of each different stage of the sleep. Growth hormone, which stimulates the muscle growth and repair, bone building, and fat burning, is released during deeper sleep. In contrast, sleep deprivation wreaks havoc on physical performance with effects including slower muscle recovery, changes in mood, increased level of cortisol, decreased glycogen synthesis, and increased ratings of perceived exertion. Which indicators can help reflect sleep quality and duration for you? First of all, I think self assessment is really important. You can check how you feel when you wake up. For most of us, it's okay to feel a little bit groggy first thing in the morning, but if you wake up feeling tired and you go to bed feeling more tired, you are likely overtrained. So it's a matter of answering how you feel in the first place. But if you look into the indicators, how much deep sleep you had is an important factor. It's easy to get devices or most wearables that not only measure how much you sleep you had, but also what type of sleep you had. So each stages are really clear. I have athletes that I work with that who thought they had been sleeping well, so they thought they were getting enough sleep. But when we check their sleep data from their devices, we realized, for example, one athlete that have a really low deep sleep, and this will probably have delayed her recovery because she was recovering from an injury. So most physical repair in the body happens during deep sleep, which is also phase 3 sleep. That makes it critical stage for athletes who need adaptations to happen while resting at night. That's why we call sleep is the best recovery tool. It is good to look at trends from your watch, if from your wearable device or watch. If you notice getting less and less deep sleep, for example, if it's lower than 1.5, 2 hours a night, then you might need to look at training volume and other aspects of life. Again, just go back to episode 3 to understand how sleep impacts and how you can improve it. The last indicator that I can talk about sleep is that how often you wake in the night. Most people will wake up 2 or 3 times on an average each night, and going back to sleep after 15 to 20 minutes maximum is okay. But if you wake up regularly and you struggle to get back to sleep most nights, this can become a problem. It could mean that you're overtired from training or you're overstressed from other life pressures. So just remember, when it comes to recovery, sleep is the best tool. Most wearables these days have evolved beyond fitness trackers that capture heart rate, HRV, sleep, steps, and much more. And some of today's wearable technology can monitor for signs of trauma from physical impact. Jess, are there any good examples of how these indicators help teams or athletes to address recovery issues?
Yeah, I found it really interesting to see some of the bigger name sports teams starting to really utilize wearable technology and using that as a tool to help gauge training and everything from their for their athletes. So the Toronto Raptors, they had the highest rate of player injuries in the league in the 2012 season.
Mm-hmm.
And then they started using wearable technology and monitoring the players for signs of soft tissue injury while practicing and playing. And in the 2014 season, the Raptors changed their course and they had the least number of injuries of any team in the league.
Wow.
That so you went from the worst to the best. And
Yeah.
one of the things they did, the biggest thing they did was starting using wearable technology and monitoring their players a little bit closer for health. So I thought that was pretty interesting.
Yeah, it's
And
using data
yeah,
for intelligence. I think just implementing the data, interpreting, it's really important. So that's what we are trying to achieve in this episode, I guess.
yeah,
How to interpret the data so you can use it for the good of your
yeah.
performance.
And I think one thing to state here is like that's really important is if you decide to use wearable technology, you do have to interpret it
Yeah,
and I think use it with a grain of salt, but you also have to be willing to listen to it at some point. Like if
exactly.
you constantly are wearing it and you're like, my HRV's tanked, my HRV is tanked. I had a crappy training day and I got injured. If you're not going to listen to it, then there's no reason to have it. It's kind of
I
my thought too.
I agree. Also, you are made aware of something that is not going well, but
Yeah.
if you're not taking action on it, it's going to make you also more miserable, more
Yeah.
uncomfortable, comfortable. You're probably even going to just take off your wearable device and forget about it. But
For
don't do it. They say something to you, and we are trying to explain how you can
yeah.
use it for your benefit. Well,
Yeah.
what about, are there any other teams?
Yeah, so there
US,
was another
great
one
example.
in the state of Florida here in the United States, the
Mhm.
Florida State Seminoles, which is a college football team. The athletes began wearing using wearable analytic devices. Theirs was specifically by a company called Catapult. And the same year that they started wearing and using and monitoring these wearable devices, they noticed an 88% reduction in
Wow.
injuries to soft tissues in that same year.
That's great.
So, like, I think it's really interesting to show that these big time teams, they invest a lot of money in their
Mm.
athletes. Their athletes have potential, and they're using these devices to help decrease injury and increase performance.
Yeah.
Again, you do have to listen. It does take a little bit of listening to your body, self assessment, like you talked about, and utilizing the technology and combining that together.
There is one example from Turkey as well. Fenerbahçe football team. it's not a wearable device, but they used artificial intelligence to prevent injuries, and they have been using a thermal camera to measure athletes' risk of muscle injury. But
Interesting.
they have implemented this device, and then they started to have, I think, consecutively in 2 games, 2 players got injured for a long time, and the fans were making fun on Twitter, like, oh, they have been, so I think the artificial intelligence is broken, they can do mistakes. The answer here from the health team of the team, health team of the football team, was that this technology was avoiding so muscle injuries, but not muscle injuries coming from impact.
That makes sense.
So yes, it's hard to predict them what
Yeah.
in the game, of course. But I don't know what type of result they have in terms of muscle injuries. But that was an interesting story I heard about, and many big teams are benefiting from using some sort of artificial intelligence and digital health
Yeah.
data to prevent injury and make performance better.
Yeah, I mean, you can't prevent injuries 100% of the time. There's going to be collisions,
Ex-
tackles,
Exactly.
things that are totally freak accidents, but if you can prevent, you know, 70, 80% or whatever percentage you can of injuries that are preventable from repetitive use and, overtraining and stuff like that, you've moved the needle in a positive direction. You're
Exactly.
like you said, you can't do it 100% of the time.
I agree. I agree.
So I think we probably jump into some subjective indicators that, again, like you said, looking at some self-assessment that you could use to kind of day-to-day tools to look at your recovery. I would say there's a couple that probably my three questions to ask myself um, is one, looking at your appetite.
Hmm.
Appetite loss is actually a well-known symptom of overtraining. Depending on the severity, a loss of appetite may also then interfere with adequate in energy and nutrition intake and
Hmm.
result in inadequate recovery.
Hmm.
So it's normal to be really hungry after training, but if you start noticing after training, you start decide, for days aren't hungry as much as you used to be, you may want to kind of look at that. So that is something to self-assess.
Yeah.
Um,
Good point.
soreness, how sore your muscles are.
Oh.
So soreness is a normal response to intense training, and it's because the micro trauma to your muscles is needed for stimulus for muscle growth. However, the growth will not happen without adequate time for repair. And the soreness from adequate repair is also increases your chance of injury. So if we look at it here, you need to make sure that if you are sore, you are taking time to recover, be sleeping, nutrition, everything we've talked about, and that more and more soreness can also increase your risk for injury. So if you're overly sore, you may need to take an extra day off or look at your training.
Yeah.
And the last thing is something you can assess is your injury or your energy level. So some days you simply won't feel like you have the juice, and that's okay. It's a kind of old saying of listen to your body, and that's extremely valuable. However, the pertinent word here is your body. The key is to distinguish low energy from under recovery, from low motivation, feeling lazy, or mental stress. So it does take a lot of self assessment and looking inwards, which a lot of people fear and don't really want to do, as to why is your energy levels changing and what is causing that. Neilham, are there some other indicators you think you could add here?
Yeah, I can add a few more. I think checking, I mean, energy level, it goes maybe more or less together. Your mood,
Yeah.
your mind and body are connected. In fact, they are one in the same. And so it should become as no surprise that your mental state impacts your recovery, and vice versa. Your recovery status can impact your mood. If you are feeling apathetic, grouchy, or even depressed or anxious, this can be a reflection of physical fatigue from subpar recovery. The next one I can mention is health status in general. If you're flirting with that line towards overtraining, your immune system cannot perform optimally and you will be more susceptible to illness. And when you feel a scratchy throat or runny nose coming on, this is a good indication to take it easy and rest up. I'm gonna be self-exposed myself that something I haven't done, and I paid the price. My I have attended several competitions one and after. Then I traveled and had a busy schedule for work and education, and that's where probably my immune system will have has been weakened from cleaning the waste from my 10K. And at the same time, because I have been exposed to different environments, I probably get some bacteria or virus, and I had feelings of that scratchy throat and runny nose. I tried to rest, but I didn't listen to my body. And then I had a longer period of illness, which I'm still recovering from. So I think every healthcare professional will tell you, like, listen to your body, rest when it's needed. I just want to give you a personal experience that I haven't, and it's a lessons learned. So this is exactly what you shouldn't do.
I was going to say, I think it goes to show everybody, no, none of us are perfect. Like, we give this advice, and sometimes we don't listen to our own advice, and we know better, but it's to be something you want to think about, look at, consider, and try and do, I think, more consistently.
Yeah.
That will improve your health overall. So I just, to be honest, and both of us out there, both of us have done that. All of these
Yeah.
things that we said not to do, we've done it.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's not perfect, but one is always
No,
better than zero. So whatever you
correct.
do each day, like for example, now I had to decrease my exercise intensity, and even I decided not to compete in one of the race that I was preparing for. So if you don't want to experience such situation, I think listening to your body when you had the first signs and giving enough time to recover is something, and there are indicators to help you with that. But there is also one healthcare professional who told me that I was going too fast, that my body couldn't catch my mind. That's also like one of the reason why an
Yeah,
athlete can also become sick. So that's where your mood, your mental state is really important in terms of recovery.
agreed.
And the last thing I can share is yesterday's performance. It's one of the best indicators of your recovery status. How you have performed over the past days is something that you can self reflect. If you see a downward trend in performance, it's a good signal that it's time to take your foot off the gas and give a break. We can continue with field based tests in addition to the indicators we shared. This can help you measure your levels of fitness, therefore provide a barometer for you. Any decrease in fitness may be an early warning sign of suboptimal recovery or even overtraining. I'm going to hand over to you, Jess, for sharing some examples of common tests in terms of field based tests. Again, whatever we are sharing is just some of the indicators here. If you think we have missed any, I'm sure there are. Please let us know and we'll
Yeah.
take a look into. But I'll hand over to you, Jess.
Yeah. So I think, field-based tests, some of it depends on the validity of the test. Some of it depends on the sport you're playing. Some will lean more applicable to one sport over another, whether it's an endurance sport or a strength-based sport. But the first one that I think a lot of people utilize is the CO2 tolerance test. And so CO2 tolerance is your body's ability to tolerate a certain amount of CO2, which is carbon dioxide buildup, before it tells you it's time to expel some air from your body. As I said, CO2 or carbon dioxide is a byproduct of respiration. And contrary to commonly beheld belief, it's certainly not a waste product. When you breathe in oxygen, your body expels carbon dioxide. Your cells create energy using oxygen, creating CO2 as an off gas. As CO2 builds up in the body, a signal tells the body to breathe. The buildup of CO2 in the body is not a bad thing per se. CO2 is necessary for your body to coordinate the needed breathing rate at any time. So it's CO2 that signals your body that you need to breathe, not oxygen. Your tolerance to CO2 is how much you can accumulate before your body becomes overly stressed and you need to breathe. By improving your CO2 tolerance, this strengthens your body's ability to adapt to stressors. CO2 tolerance training is a method that rescue divers pioneered to train themselves to be able to hold their breath for more extended periods. This method has been pioneered by these divers and furthered by performance training experts such as Andrew Huberman at Stanford University. CO2 tolerance test is a powerful method you can use to better understand how your body responds to stress. All it takes is a timer and a few minutes of your time to assess your tolerance. The big thing is don't look at the measurements before doing this. Don't sit with an empty lungs watching your stopwatch until you get to the elite level. That is a measure of how competitive you are, not a measure of your physiological readiness. So, if you want to do a CO2 tolerance test, this is how you do it. So, get your stopwatch or your phone ready, and you want to start by taking 3 breaths in and out through your nose. Take
Fine.
one more breath and fill your lungs up all the way. As you begin to exhale this breath, start your stopwatch. Let this breath out as slowly as possible, trying to extend it as long as possible. If you want your breath or shall oh so if you want to hold your breath or swallow, start over. When you're out of air, stop the timer. So your results, they give you a glimpse of your CO2 of your body's CO2 tolerance level. If you're if this lasts for less than 20 seconds of slowly breathing out, it means that your CO2 tolerance needs some work. 20 to 40 seconds is average for most people to achieve. 40 to 60 seconds is above average score that represents good CO2 tolerance. And greater than 60 seconds means a healthy pulmonary system and good stress and breath control. So if you're using this as a gauge for recovery, any change in about 15 to 20% in seconds considers that your body is signaling a need to focus more on recovery. How'd you do, Niham?
I mean, I'm gonna try it offline because I didn't want to make a lot of noise. But I'm gonna test it, and just reminds me of also the pause between breaths. I think it's interconnected.
Yes.
Another data we shared earlier. I'm gonna test it out. I hope I don't choke. But I'm gonna test it myself. And after a period of illness, because since I'm still in the recovery, I think I'll be able to measure the change over
Yeah.
time, understand if I'm fully recovered and ready to perform as good
Yeah.
as was pre-illness. I'm going to continue with the next indicator, which is also very well known to athletes, VO2 max. VO2 max is the amount, the volume of oxygen your body uses while exercising as hard as possible, because it's the maximum. It's a common tool to understand your fitness level, well known by everyone. Knowing your VO2 max can help you train for sports, track your fitness, improvement, recovery, and improve your heart health. When you breathe, you inhale oxygen into your blood. Your heart pumps the blood into your muscles. That oxygen fuels chemical reactions that give your muscles energy. You breathe more quickly and deeply while exercising because your muscles need more energy to work harder. VO2 max measures how much oxygen, usually measured in milliliters, how much oxygen your breathes in while exercising as hard as you can. The more oxygen you inhale, the more energy your body can use. Higher VO2 max means usually better physical fitness, and VO2 max is especially helpful for athletes like runners, swimmers, cross country skiers, and rowers to guide their training, more for endurance athletes. In terms of athletic recovery, VO2 max can be used as a tool to monitor the progress of an athlete's recovery from an injury or illness. A lower VO2 max value may indicate that the athlete has not fully recovered and may need more time to rest and recover. How can you measure VO2 max? We've seen athletes with this mask, usually, especially elite athletes, where they visited a lab to find out find their VO2 max. Uh, you need to visit a lab to test this or other testing centers. They're going to put a mask over your face that captures the amount of oxygen in your breath while you are training, maybe running a treadmill. You can also estimate with math or a tool. We can, of course, ask athletes to choose one or another. It's just trying to give you a simple tool that you can test it on your own if you can't get to a lab. You can estimate your VO2 max with an equation. Some digital watches or other fitness products predict your VO2 max using your heart rate. I recommend athletes to get their biomarkers tested once a year, in addition to the indicators which I shared, uh, twice a year for female athletes, just when they get the results in other to the indicators we shared. What biomarkers can help athletes to monitor trends of recovery?
Yeah. So I think it's really important to, do a biomarker. A lot of people find it really helpful to do one in the off season and one during season. So you can see in a recovered state and a non-stress state that in the off season, how recovered, how fully nourished, how healthy you are versus what happens when you start in the middle towards the end of season when you start to break down. So there are some markers of inflammation and muscle breakdown that can be monitored. CRP, high CRP indicates stress and inflammation within the body, often resulting from the breakdown of tissues. High intensity training increases inflammation and temporarily results in increased CRP. If you do not get sufficient recovery, CRP levels will remain elevated. You can also measure cytokines such as IL-6. Adaptation through tissue healing and strengthening occurs via activating local inflammatory response and recruiting cytokines like IL-6. With continued intense training and inadequate rest, this inflammatory response becomes amplified, chronic, and pathological. Evidence indicates that increased production and or intolerance to IL-6 during exercise may be a marker of overtraining and or under recovery. The next two are creatine phosphokinase and lactate dehydrogenase, and they usually shorten these to CPK and D or LDH. And these are enzymes found to be raised in your blood after exercising. While this has been reported from intense training, this is not necessarily a marker for overtraining. However, very high levels of CPK in the blood do indicate that overtraining may be imminent. Raised CPK levels occur as a direct consequence of damage to muscle cells and often runs parallel with post-exercise muscle soreness. Another indicator we can use is plasma urea concentration. Concentrations of nitrogenous waste in the blood, i.e., urea, 3-methylhistidine, and uric acid, may provide a measure of muscle protein breakdown and hence may be markers of overtraining. You can also look at markers of impaired immunity The immune system is extremely sensitive to stress, both physiological and psychological, and thus potential immune variables could be used as an index of stress in relationship to exercise. Possible variables that you could look at are leukocyte count, T lymphocytes, salivary IgA, hormones. This may be slightly murky since they are impacted in other ways, but you could also look at TSH for your thyroid, growth factor, um, testosterone, testosterone to cortisol ratio, and your adrenal stress index. This list is long and can be very overwhelming. The
It,
idea of tracking these metrics may feel impossibly cumbersome.
yeah, it is.
It is. So let me reassure you that not only would tracking all of these be incompatible with normal life, it's not a practically useful method. Most of these metrics are dynamic and influenced by multiple stimuli that may or may not relate to your body's recovery status. But I
Right.
do think it's something important to know that if you do get blood work, that what you did the day before may impact your blood work levels. So usually if I having an athlete that is just trying to get regular labs done, I do recommend they get them the morning after a day of either light training or um, rest, so
Of
that so a lot of the inflammatory markers are recovered and you don't see all of it. But if you're trying to gauge inflammation and stress and all of that, then take those labs after a training day. And I know of some athletes that do both and see what the difference is to see how their body is responding. So some of these labs and monitoring this may be at a much, much higher level, but some of these are labs that are drawn in regular, like annual exams. So something you want to be aware of.
That's true. Yeah, that's a really good advice because if you don't, I mean, if athletes get false positive tests and try to address that, that may also mislead
Yeah.
what's right for the athlete. So it's good to get your blood or biomarkers tested regularly after maybe during the off season and while you're also training so that we can understand or healthcare professionals can understand better how your body is responding because athletes physiology and biochemistry is way much different than
Mhm.
normal population. Yes, it is overwhelming, and if you try to monitor, then when are you going to train? So that's what I'm asking. So that's why there is no single way, and we really can't tell which is the best. I think the best way is to using a combination of monitoring the indicators, self-reflecting yourself, but also working with an expert, so that you can get a 360 view of yourself, and the healthcare professional can get a 360 view of yourself, of the athlete. Sometimes the data helps lead a conversation. Sometimes the conversation yields more information than you would otherwise see in the data. So that's why always having a combination of the data you get, checking your feelings and working with an expert and self-reflection works. It is our duty as sports pharmacists to use both areas to full effect to get a holistic picture of the athlete, then make informed, data driven decisions to improve their recovery and ultimately to improve the performance of the athletes we are working with. Recently, the ever shrinking sensor technology has let us tap into oceans of data about athletic performance and recovery. Some of them we still don't know what they are. For every in that ocean, every resting heart rate and functional power threshold, a new tool has emerged to capture it, and we are trying to learn as the technology advances. I always say data is power, but intelligence is powerful. I think I don't know who had said the quote, but I find this very powerful. So if you don't understand what the data you get from your wearable device or other resources, if you don't check the trends and listen to what the data says to you, it's worthless and it's a burden, I think. So that's why it's important to understand and make sense of it. As we sort through the migrate recovery indicators today, different strategies, and the varied levels of scientific support for each indicator, it's important to remember that both scientific and anecdotal evidence point to the value of an appropriate recovery plan for each athlete to encourage adaptation, wellness, and performance. When it comes to your health and well-being choices, we always recommend you to consult with your physician or pharmacist while you are doing your self-reflection, and prioritize your safety and always make informed data-based decisions. We thank you for joining us today, and we look forward to sharing more valuable scientific and actionable insights in our next episodes.